Okay, well, hello everyone who's joined us. We're delighted to welcome you to this first EPRC seminar of 2023. Today we welcome Professor Ugo Fratesi from Politecnico de Milano, who will be sharing his co-authored research, as you can see on screen, on administrative capacity and the territorial effects of EU support to firms that he's done with Julia Bachtrögler from WIFO and a colleague in Milano, Giovanni Perucca. Names will be familiar, I think, to everybody. Our standard approach is that the presentation should last about 30 minutes, and for the remaining time, we'll open the floor for questions and comments from participants. As always, if you'd like to make an intervention, please use the Zoom raise hand function, or feel free to put questions or comments in the chat, and we'll address these following the presentation in the Q&A. Before saying a bit more about our speaker, I want to inform you that this meeting is being recorded, so that you and colleagues and others have the opportunity to follow the meeting, the presentation to later stage. And we'll make the recording available on our YouTube channel and share this with you, share the link with you by email. We'd also encourage you to use Twitter to share your thoughts on the webinar. Please spread the word and on the research that Ugo is presenting. So let me say a few words about our speaker. Ugo Fratesi is Professor of Regional Economics and Policy at the Politecnico de Milano. He's been editor of parts of the journal Regional Studies between 2013 and 2021. He was member of the Council of the Italian section of the Regional Science Association International and its treasurer for the period 2010 to 2013. He's been involved in many major research projects with EU and other funding, and is the author of a forthcoming textbook on regional policy to be published by Routledge, coming on top of a long history of important publications in the fields of regional economics. And this issue of administrative capacity that Ugo is presenting today is very topical, really important given the questions that there are about the effectiveness of EU cohesion policy for a number of years. So without further ado, let me give the floor to our speaker, Ugo.
Okay. So thank you, John, and thank you all EPRC for inviting me for this webinar. It's really a pleasure to participate. Today I'm presenting a paper which is forthcoming in regional studies in a special issue on administrative capacity, who I think is going to be published this year. And John Butler is among the editors as well, with Polverari, and I don't remember exactly everybody else. This is a joint work, as was already mentioned, with Julia Bachtrögler of WIFO. So that's why you have two logos in this presentation. And Giovanni Perucca, who is a colleague of mine here at Politecnico and also a long-standing co-author of mine. So the topic is the territorial effects of EU support to firms, and especially how administrative capacity influences this. And then the two-step analysis refers to the methodology, which is novel, as I will tell you why. So let's start with the introduction and motivating what is our research. Basically, this research inserts into the question of where is a cohesion policy more effective. So we are trying to provide further evidence on where it is more effective in order to allow policymakers to make it more effective by learning from the best cases. And we are also referring to the academic and political debate on the effectiveness of EU cohesion policy. Why? Because it has been shown that there is no recipe for achieving additional economic growth in all the European regions. So there is not a single recipe working everywhere in the same way. And there are different dimensions of policy implementation to be kept in mind when evaluating the policy. So all the evaluations answering the question, is cohesion policy effective or not, have given floor to more sophisticated analysis, which try to investigate what makes it more effective and what doesn't. So, sorry, that's switching. Okay. So the literature is the one which mentioned the so-called conditioning factors of the impact of cohesion policy. So what are the aspects present in the region which can make cohesion policy more or less effective? And there are many of them in the literature. I would like to mention the industrial structure in terms of sectors present in the region. The settlement structure, for example, it has been studied that funding for less developed regions were working better for those regions which were relatively close to cities. Then territorial capital in general, and we work on that, but also this paper is in this line. Then human capital, which is a catalyst for policy impact. Then the alignment with the socioeconomic structure of the region by the policy measure. The institutions in many ways and administrative capacity. So this paper is also going into investigating this. For example, there is this very famous paper by Rodriguez Poza and Garcilaso, which adopting a macro approach shows that cohesion policy has been more effective in regions more endowed with administrative capacity. And we have a different approach to work on that. The typology of expenditure, for example, because we showed in the past that different policy axes had different impacts, and all other institutional characteristics, including even the degree of economic openness of regions. More recently, there are also other papers pointing at other aspects which may be different in different regions and also affect the impact of the policy. One is the alignment between the needs and the policy axis. So if regional policy is really targeting the needs of that region, it's more effective. The fact that different countries are, different regions are differently able to provide effective support to firms, and that's a paper which is, in a sense, the father of this one. The fact that convergence is a multipolar process, and so the actual location of regions matter for the impact of the policy. So, for example, regions closer, regions in certain Eastern European countries closer to the Western border had a higher impact. And finally, the externalities of policy effects, because there are spillovers by which expenditure in one region also affects the result in the other regions. In this paper, we use, to reply the question, in which regions is cohesion policy more effective, we use a micro approach, which enable us to compare the same policy in different settings. So that's really an issue which is important to consider when addressing cohesion policy, because cohesion policy is really multifaceted. It has a lot of different aspects inside. Of course, it's a huge budget, but also a lot of different objectives, and not all of them are really economic. So it will be wrong to evaluate all of them in the same way. So basically, we want to restrict with this micro approach to having similar beneficiaries which carry out comparable projects, although in different places. And so in this way, we can compare the fact that these beneficiaries benefit from receiving firm grants through cohesion policy funds. Okay, so we focus on firm grants, not on everything of cohesion policy, although firm grants are a relatively large part of the cohesion policy budget and certainly a very large part of the part devoted to economic growth and cohesion. So in terms of methodology, okay, you are probably know the diff methodology, the comparison of the performance of treated and untreated firms to get the effect of the policy, okay? But so you may consider one of these two graphs, okay? But what we are doing here is to do this in different places at the same time. So basically, we are comparing the same type of intervention in different regions, okay? Why? Because if the difference between the performance of treated and untreated firms is different in different regions, this should be due to something happening in the region, okay? Because if all firms are similar and there is a difference in the effect of the treatment, this means that something makes this treatment more effective, okay? And in this paper, we focus specifically on territorial aspects and especially on administrative capacity. Methodologically, this paper introduces a small innovation, okay, linked to the fact that we use this two-step methodology. The first step is the estimation of the effects of cohesion policy on firm performance in the various European NUTS2 regions. Okay, so basically it's a propensity score matching exercise which allows to estimate the average treatment effect on treated NUTS2 region by NUTS2 region. Okay, then we get these differentiated things, and in the second step, we go on to estimate the factors which make this effect different. Okay, and to do this, basically we refer to meta-analysis techniques in the way that I will show you in a while. So the first methodological step, we start from a data set of micro-level data for cohesion policy evaluation, which has been built by Ugo Fratesi the last year. Okay, it's a database on the actual beneficiaries during the multi-annual financial framework 2007-2013. But then you can know from official sources which firms benefited from grants, but you don't know the characteristics of these firms. Okay, so the beneficiaries data set is matched with the Orbis business database, because in this way it's possible to match information on firms. Okay, so their size, their age, their financial data, their sector of activity, and so on and so forth. Okay, in this way there is a database which allows a matching exercise for comparing the performance of similar firms that have received grants and firms which haven't received them. Then this is the starting database, but we restrict this database. Okay, so we restricted first because we wanted to have comparability of projects in terms of thematic fields and objectives. Okay, so then we focus on grants to firms only in the manufacturing industry. Okay, why? Because we believe that the firms in the manufacturing industry, by and large, use grants to increase their competitiveness, whereas other sectors, such as public sector or some service sector, when they receive grants, don't just have the competitiveness object. Okay, so we restrict in this way in order to have something comparable. Then, in terms of country coverage, we are left with 6 European countries: the Czech Republic, Spain, France, Italy, Portugal, and Slovakia. Okay, we wanted to have all European countries, but this is not possible. Why? Because there are countries for which NUTS2 level information is not available. For example, Germany. Okay, for Germany, we don't know in which NUTS2 our firms are located. And for other countries, we just had one region, and so we decided also to drop all the countries with just one. Okay, so at the end we were left with 6 countries, but these are still countries with different levels of development. Some are new member states, some are old member states. So we think that this sample, of course, is not full, but it represents different aspects. Okay. Methodologically, in this first step, there is a matching on observable. So there is it's a relatively standard propensity score matching exercise. Okay, we use the EPRC method. And then there is this difference in difference estimation, which compares the outcome in selected firms after and prior to receiving grants, and compares with the other firms which are similar but didn't receive the grant. Okay, in this way, we get an average treatment effect on the treated, okay, an ATT, and region by region. Just to let you know, so we use the firm level controls to select similar firms. So the initial firm size in terms of number of employees, the initial firm age in terms of years in incorporation, the capital intensity in terms of assets per employee, and also the ratio between assets and liability. The dependent variable is the change in firm employment. So basically, the growth of employment in terms of post-treatment number of employees minus the pre-treatment number of employees. And for the pre-treatment, we use 2006 or 2007 if there is nothing else. For the post-treatment, we use 2014 and 15 and 16 if there is nothing else. Okay, then we also did some sensitivity analysis by slightly moving these, but the idea is that we want to keep the period of analysis as the programming period, the relevant programming period. Okay. Then, when the sample is large enough, we can produce this average treatment on treated region by region at NUTS2 level. Okay, but for some countries we didn't have so many firms, so for France, we upshift to NUTS1 level, okay, so larger regions. And for a few regions, we decided not to have them in the sample, okay? Estimating these, it turns out that these average treatment effects on treated are different both across countries, okay, I'm not showing this, but also within countries, okay? And here is the map of the result of the first step. It's a map of in which you only see our countries. Okay, the other ones are gray. The color represents the estimated ATT. Okay, but then there is another aspect, the fact that you need to consider the significance of coefficients. Okay, so if a coefficient is positive but is not significant, okay, then we shade it and we consider it as 0. Okay, so at the end we only keep the positive and significant coefficients. Okay, as you can see in the map, there is there are very different results even within the same country. Okay, so look at Spain, look at Italy, look at the Czech Republic. Okay, these effects are different across regions. Okay, so this ATT is different across regions. The next step is to explain the determinants. Okay, so how to explain the determinants? That's our second step. Okay, we want to explain the determinants okay? And this is a sort of meta-analysis in a sense, okay? Why? Because basically we are taking as a dependent variable the results of different regressions, okay? But in our case, all regressions have the same form. They are computed in different regions, okay? There are, of course, several methodological difficulties in doing this. Okay, the fact that we have a limited number of observations from only a few countries, so we don't have so many regions. We have observations which are scattered in space, which prevents from doing a lot of spatial econometrics. We have possible different dependent variables because we need to consider at the same time the significance and the magnitude of the impact. Our dependent variable has a lot of zeros. Why? Because when the variable is not significant, it is basically zero. And when we look at the explanatory variables, these explanatory variables are normally highly correlated among them. Okay, so regional eligible for assistance and GDP per capita are really correlated, but so are many territorial characteristics. I will show you in a while how we solve these issues. Okay. The determinants which we wanted to investigate conceptually were the territorial characteristics, okay, which we think can impact the effect of cohesion policy through synergy and complementarities. The administrative capacity, which can make administration better or less able to implement good policy. General policy characteristics, such as the fact that a region is lagging or not. National aspects, which we consider through national control. And then the regression characteristics as in meta-analysis, because, for instance, we don't have the same number of observations everywhere. Okay. Starting from the territorial characteristics, we use the territorial capital framework. This concept was first introduced by the OECD in 2001, but then it was refined by Roberto Camagne, a colleague here at Politecnico, in 2009. And this considers all the assets and the various capitals which are relevant to the long run development of territories. And in the conceptualization by Camagne, you can classify these assets in two dimensions. On the vertical side, you have the dimension of rivalry from low to high, so from public goods to private goods, passing through public goods and into public goods. On the horizontal axis, you have the materiality, which goes from high to low, so high materiality for tangible goods, low materiality for intangible goods, and then there are mixed goods in the middle. And then you can classify everything here. Okay, so for example, human capital is private and intangible, infrastructure is public and tangible, and so on and so forth. Okay, you can see everything inside. Okay, we tried to get a measure for these cells. So basically, the territorial characteristics of regions that we use are these, okay, accessibility, presence of collective goods, presence of private capital, of relational capital, human capital, agglomeration economies, and relational private services, all measured at the beginning of the programming period. And they have different levels of materiality and rivalry, so that they cover different aspects of territorial capital. Okay. Now, when you consider territorial capital, the theory of territorial capital says that the different components do not act alone, but they work in synergy the one with the other. Okay, so it doesn't make really sense to work on one of them individually. Moreover, these measures tend to be correlated because normally regions which are strong on one component are also strong in other components. Okay. That's why we opted for reducing the dimension from our 8 measures to these components, okay? And at the end, we have 3 components which have eigenvalue higher than 1 and which overall have a cumulative share of explained variance of more than 70%. In terms of interpretation, okay, we look at which factors have higher loading in these components, and so we get that these components are interpreted basically as these. The first one is intermediate materiality assets, so it includes agglomeration economies and relational services. The second component is high materiality assets. It includes tangible private and public capital and collective goods. The third one is low materiality assets and includes intangible elements, including human capital and relational capital. Okay, these three components will be among our regressors. Now, we also focus on administrative capacity, okay? And in terms of administrative capacity, I'd like to refer to my book, which is going to be published. It's in press. And basically, the relationship between administrative capacity and regional economic development is quite complex, okay? There is, of course, a direct effect by which, thanks to good administrative capacity, firms work in a better economic environment, and so regional economic development increases, okay? But there is also a backward effect, which goes through demand and supply effect. Why? Because if the region is developed, there is a supply effect, because this helps the regional administration to be more effective, thanks to the fact that they have better suppliers, for example, in the place. And there is also a demand effect, because a more developed firm system is normally requiring better factors from the regional administration, okay? But in this paper, we are interested in these aspects below, which is the indirect effect of regional administrative capacity on regional economic development, which passes through the implementation of good regional policies. Why is that? Of course, because good administrations are able to acquire more funds. They are able to spend them wisely. They are able to select good projects. They are able to implement better policies, okay? And all these is better for regional economic development. When we get to the measures, okay, there is always, it's never easy to measure the actual administrative capacity of places. So you always resort to proxies, okay? We needed data for basically before or something like that, our programming period. So our three variables are civic engagement, which is a proxy for trust in government. Why? Because we believe that where people have more trust in their government, they are all more likely to be involved in public issues, okay? And for this, we use as a proxy voter turnout in the 2009 EU Parliament election. Then we have bureaucratic complexity, because of course, if there is bureaucratic complexity, this is more complex to run a business, and so also policy impact should be lower, okay? And this is in terms of number of days needed to open a business. And then we also use the cohesion policy absorption rate, so which is a traditional measure for administrative capacity, and it's the share of funds committed which has been paid to the region, okay? Then we have two other variables, which are not directly administrative capacity, but which may be related to that. One is a dummy for capital regions. Why? Because capital regions usually have a lot of public administrations there. And so, in a sense, they have a different type of administrations, because they have also higher tiers of administration. And they also, and we finally, and following the suggestion of a referee, the control for the type of national system. So if it is a centralized or decentralized, because of course, conceptually, this can make a difference for regions which go to use or not these things. Okay. Then we have two other policy variables. One is the eligibility as less developed regions. Why it is relevant? Because less developed regions in the European system have a much higher level of funding. So normally they have more money, so they may implement different types of projects. But they also have the problem of being less developed, so they have legs in territorial capital assets. And of course, the country system overall, which we control with national banks. Okay, let's go to the results. Okay, so methodologically, our dependent variable is the average treatment effect on treated. Okay, on firm employment growth in the region. Okay, set to 0 when it is not significant, which means that our variable has this shape with a lot of 0. This requires a Poisson regression because that's how we can follow this particular shape of the dependent variable. But we also used a negative binomial regression as a robustness check because, of course, we had all these zeros, and the results are basically the same. Okay, that's how is our dependent variable. Okay, so we have all the levels of ATT. Okay, and then we have 0 for all cases in which they are not significant. So let's go to the results. Okay, before focusing on these, let's get on what is this regression. Okay, so it's a number of Poisson regression models with different specifications, and by blocks we have our variables. Okay, and then there are different specifications, and the number of observations is always the same. Is 62 regions, which was the maximum that we were able to get with this level of detail. Okay, so first we have the territorial characteristics, and we have the 3 components which we found. The first one is intermediate materiality, high materiality, and low materiality. And we got that only the first component turns out to be significant. It is positive and significant in all specifications, very significant indeed. The 2 others are not relevant. This means that for our purposes, okay, we are not looking at how territorial capital impacts regional development, but we are looking at how territorial capital impact the effects of cohesion policy. Okay, so we get that the intermediate materiality components of territorial capital, such as agglomeration economies, are those more relevant and so more complementary to policy efforts. Then we introduce the controls for meta-analysis techniques. Okay, these are basically controls. We are not really interested in them. But we need to control for them because since we have a different number of firms in different regions, and this may be relevant, and indeed it is relevant, so we have to control for that. And some regions have in our sample a lot of treated firms, and the other regions have in our sample fewer treated firms. So we also need to control for that. This is not always significant, although it's always positive. Okay, but these controls are there important. Then we look at convergence regions. Convergence regions usually tend to have a higher positive coefficient, which means that ceteris paribus convergence regions tend to have relatively higher effects of firm support. Okay, what does it mean? It means that probably firms in convergent regions are more in need, and so when you support firms which are more in need, you are also getting more impact. Then we look at administrative capacity. In terms of administrative capacity, we have our 3 variables. Okay, The first proxy is civic engagement, okay? And civic engagement is positive and significant. So where there is civic engagement, support to firms tend to be more effective. The other one is bureaucratic complexity, and bureaucratic complexity is negative and significant, and that's what we expected. Okay, why? Because of course, if it takes more time to open a business, it means that it's more complex to run a business. So even if they give you a grant, it's more difficult for you to use it, okay, if you're an entrepreneur. Okay, that's what we expected. The cohesion policy absorption rate doesn't look significant in our case, and we think that in a sense this proxy is a bit overvalued because there are places with very good administrative capacity. I make you an example in Italy. Okay, if you consider the province of Bolzano in Italy, it's probably the most developed NAC2 region in Italy. They have a very good administration, okay, but they usually have low cohesion policy absorption rate. Why? Because basically cohesion policy is marginal in their region, and they don't really need this money as much, and they are doing lots of good projects on their own sources. Okay, so cohesion policy absorption rate is not the perfect proxy in this case. Then we look at the presence of a capital city, which, as I told you, may be relevant because in a capital city you also have a higher level of administration. And indeed, it turns out to be positive and significant. And finally, we look at the monocentric structure of the variable, of the country, but this doesn't seem to make a difference. Okay, so countries which are more centralized, countries which are less centralized, don't seem to work differently in this aspect. So I go to the conclusion. Okay. And so it's my last slide. In terms of conclusions and policy implications. So first of all, our conclusion is that regional characteristics are a very important determinant of the effectiveness of firm support policies. Okay, so basically we took the same firm support policies and we show that their effectiveness is different in different regions depending on the regional characteristics. First of all, territorial capital does matter. Okay, so it's important to consider territorial capital. And among the various aspects of territorial capital, those with intermediate materiality are more positively related to the impact with respect to material ones. Okay, so it's not really a matter of infrastructure. In our case, it's more a matter of agglomeration economies as complementary assets to providing firm support. Then we have a higher impact of cohesion policy support to firms in less developed regions, something which we also found in a previous paper of ours. And this is a good thing. Why it is a good thing? Because there is, in a sense, no trade-off between equity and efficiency. Why? Because we are basically saying that giving money to firms in less developed regions is more effective than giving money to firms in more developed regions. Okay, so since we are giving normally more money to less developed regions, that's where cohesion policy support is more effective, and that's a good thing. Okay, at least for grants to firms. Okay, we cannot say for other aspects such as, I don't know, infrastructure, human capital, and so on. But for what concerns firm grants, firms in lagging regions are more in need, but are also the place where you can have a higher effectiveness. Then, in terms of regional characteristics, the impact in capital regions. So there are certainly complementarities in this sense, which make ceteris paribus this effect higher. Then the second message concerns administrative capacity, and administrative capacity increases the effectiveness of support to firms. Okay, so we already have papers which say that administrative capacity increases the impact of cohesion policy overall, okay, with a macro approach. So think about Rodriguez Esposa and Garcilaso and all the others which follow. But we were also able to show that administrative capacity increases the effectiveness of specific policies of support to firms. Okay, why is that? Because this increases the absorption of funding available. This puts a better selection of projects. This adds a better implementation of the project, and finally, better learning from implementations, because probably these administrations are better able to use evaluation reports to improve their policies in the future. Then, in terms of policy consequences, that there are two of them. One which says that complex policies are required. Why? Because if the territorial assets which matter more are those of intermediate materiality, so in our case, agglomeration economies and relational services, these are really aspects on which it is very complex to intervene. Okay, you can build a motorway. Okay, it takes money and time, but you build a motorway. Building agglomeration economies is much more complex, because you may think about the purpose of many special economic zones, which was to build agglomeration economies in a place, but some of them have been successful and many others have not. So it's not really something that you build from scratch if you don't have a prerequisite. Okay, so this is the first policy conclusion, which is a bit pessimistic, but the optimistic policy conclusion is the second one. Okay, so the fact that since we show that administrative capacity is positive, helpful, and relevant, it's helpful to continue with capacity building efforts. Okay, we know that in terms of cohesion policy in 2014-2020, there was a thematic objective specifically for administrative capacity. Now, with the new programming period, administrative capacity is an horizontal objective, so it is not a specific item per se, but there still are many situations in which you may, let's say, they try to improve policy learning. They try to increase the capacity of local administrations, and at least for the results of our analysis, these are helpful efforts, because then they will lead to better policy implementation. Okay, so I close here. Thank you for your attention. I didn't put the link for the paper, but you can Google it, and it's among the forthcoming ones in regional studies. And this is my email and Twitter ID if you want to keep in touch. Okay, so thank you everybody for attending, and I'm happy to get questions and suggestions and anything else.
Ugo, thank you very much for your paper. Very interesting methodology, interesting conclusions as well, and also some policy implications that we can speculate about and discuss further. We have about 15 minutes or so for questions, although we could perhaps run on over the hour. If you have any questions or comments, perhaps you could raise your hand. Sebastian, you've put a comment already in the chat.
Yeah, no, I don't have any questions so far, and but the congratulations, Ugo, for and your co-author, because it's a huge work regarding the database, the way you have treated this database, and the results are very interesting. And yeah. So congratulations. Just few words to say congratulations.
Okay, thank you very much. Very welcome from your side.
Okay. Any questions or comments that anybody has? Okay. I mean, you have some quite some positive conclusions that you can draw, Ugo. I mean, admittedly, this is on a program period that is now 2 program periods ago, but nevertheless, it was a period when the EU was really only starting to give serious attention to administrative capacity and quality of government, and it preceded a lot of the investment that has gone in administrative capacity building and the tools that were implemented in the 2014 to 20 period principally, and of course more emphasis on reforms. You talked about further capacity building being helpful, although arguably the kind of indicators that you were using are much broader than actually the conventional measures of administrative capacity, apart from the absorption rate. And it's more about the quality of government more generally in terms of the business environment and in terms of voice, in terms of citizens participation. What's interesting, though, is that you're looking at firm support. And if you recall the work that we collaborated on for the Commission on the long-term effects of the ERDF, what we've found, I mean, this was going back now to 2012-13, what we found was that, in general, interventions that were under the control of the public sector tended to be implemented better. Industrial estates, for example, environmental reclamation, some infrastructure, whereas interventions that were dependent on the business cycle or on the private sector, they were more difficult to implement. But essentially, your conclusions are more positive about business support, and I wonder if you have any thoughts on why that is.
Okay. Basically, we did this analysis. We weren't able to see whether the interventions under state control were more or less effective than these ones. Okay, basically, we restrict to this very, let's say, not narrow because it's large, but this specific part of cohesion policy, which is a firm grant. So I cannot say if it is more or less effective. I think it's nice to see that at least in the grants, in a sense, seems to make a difference. I think this may be due to different things. One is that firms, especially small and medium enterprises, may find it difficult to finance their projects in the market due to market rigidities, difficulties in getting money from banks, and so on and so forth. So when they get these grants, they use them, and these grants may also be a signal for firms when they want to have further money from banks. I mean, if I'm an entrepreneur, I go to a bank, I ask for money, they say no. But if I also say, yeah, but I also got a grant from the European Commission, and of course, probably they see me differently. The other thing is that normally these grants are also not unconditional. Okay, you don't just give money to firms, you give money to firms wanting, for example, to invest in innovation. And although in many cases these are not always additional, it's just that they may divert some funds from one side to the other, you are steering firms towards inducing more innovation. So I mean, we were open to any outcome in general, because we worked on this data set with the previous paper when we looked at the general outcomes of these funds. And it was nice to see that the general impact is positive. Still, we don't know whether it is more or less positive than other types of interventions, of course, because you need a different type of data set. Then I also get your question about the proxies for administrative capacity, because in a sense, our proxies are not measuring administrative capacity. They are, I mean, the time to open a business is probably a more direct measure of administrative capacity, because it's really something which depends on the bureaucracy. But this variable is more dependent on the state than on the single region. The other variable is indirect, of course, because if you have a good administration, you live in a region where things go quite well, and then you also tend to be more engaged. So, of course, it is indirect. We are trying to measure administrative capacity differently. We submitted a project proposal to the Italian ministry some time ago. I hope they will finance it. So perhaps in the future, I will have something with a real measure of administrative capacity.
Thanks very much for that. Do we have any other questions or observations from anybody? Perhaps I could just follow up. What I was interested in the map, if I recall it correctly, about the regional variation in terms of the effects, and what, as I think you summarized in your conclusions, I think what we saw was relatively high effects in places like Norte, Algarve, or Norte, southern Spain, I think possibly Andalusia, parts of southern Italy, which is interesting, which is not really what we found in, I think, other research that's been done, particularly on this region, particularly also in the Commission's own work that they have done on lagging regions. Were you able to tease out anything further in terms of the differences between countries and regions? Any insights?
Okay, no, we basically found these two aspects. One which goes in favor of I'm trying to get the map. Yeah. One which tends to favor the lagging regions, and one which tends to not favor them. Because on one hand, lagging regions per se, in our analysis, appear to have higher effects. Okay. And this is probably due to the fact that first, there are really more in need of public assistance, because they have less external economies, lower financial system, they don't have the banks, they don't have externalities, and so on and so forth. So which goes in favor of lagging regions. But these lagging regions, sorry, at the same time, also have the opposite problem, because this okay, I didn't have with me a map of our three components, okay, the territorial asset components, but lagging regions normally are weaker in terms of these territorial capital assets, which means that of course they are the first there live in a less favorable environment. Okay, so we have these two aspects at the same time, which go in different directions, and which may end up having one effect or the other. Okay, then I'm aware that this is also relatively different from the macroeconomic analysis, because normally many macro analysis, the less developed regions are also some which on average receive less impact from cohesion policy overall. Okay, but here we are just focusing on these support firms, because we wanted to have something really comparable, whereas I don't know, other aspects may not be directly comparable because some regions invest more in human capital, others invest more, for example, in I don't know, requalification of workers or infrastructure or whatever. Okay, so it's really difficult to compare regions the one with the other because they are probably doing different things.
Okay. Okay. Any final comments, questions?
Hello, John. Sorry, I'm trying to come in here. Broadband's not very good this morning.
Yeah, good morning.
Just wanted to say, Ugo, thank you very much. That was a really detailed and impressive analysis there. Some really interesting points. I was particularly interested in what you had to say about convergence regions and looking in particular at whether or not your measurement took account of some baseline aspects there. For example, if there was a very small number of firms at the start, that you were comparing with how the impact was at the end point. Now, I don't know, this may or may not be covered. It may bring in a whole new set of issues for your measurement and so on that might be quite tricky. But I just wondered if that was at all relevant or of interest to your findings. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Okay, no, that's good because of course convergence regions normally have lower levels of entrepreneurship and lower level of firms. Indeed, in our sample, since these regions have more money, they tend to be regions where we have data for more treated firms. Okay, so although there is lower number of firms overall, we have more treated firms there because the availability of grants tends to be larger there. Okay, so that's why we control with this meta-analysis technique for the number of firms in our sample and also for the ratio between the treated and untreated. Okay, because our convergence regions have a larger share of treated with respect to untreated in our sample. Okay, of course we don't have the universe of firms. We have a sample which is quite representative across the sectors and types of industries, but it's still a sample. Okay, so that's why we wanted to control for the fact that in convergence regions the number of treated firms is a larger share with respect to other regions, for example, the most advanced ones, where there is a lower number of firms getting money. Unfortunately, we could work with the universe of firms because to do this kind of analysis, you need to have information on the characteristics of firms, and so although you can be sure of you can know all of, at least for some countries, you have these open source databases in which you have the fiscal codes of all the firms which receive money. But if you want to have also information on these firms, you need to match these with databases such as Orbis, and so then you do what you can do with these kind of firms. But in terms of coverage, in Italy, Orbis covers, I'd say, a bit less, 10 to 15% of all firms, including not all firms, not 15. I think much more than that. In Italy, we have 2.5 million firms covered in this type of database, which is quite a lot, because all the medium and large enterprises are covered, and only the very micro ones are not. So the ones with just one or two workers. So at the end, yeah, my co-author did a very huge work in assembling this data set.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much for that. Any final point? Okay, we've just gone beyond the end of the hour, so let's bring this to a close. Ugo, thank you very much again for your presentation on the interesting research. We've had, I think, participants from about 6 or 7 countries across Europe, and we look forward to the next stage of your research. Hope good luck with the grant from the Italian government, and I'm sure that will provide new insights. If you're okay, we'll circulate the slides to participants, or we can hold them back if you prefer until the paper comes out.
Let me ask my co-authors. I think it's fine, but let me first ask my co-authors if they agree. Okay.
No problem. Thanks.
I will mail them today, so I will let you know very soon.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks again, Ugo, and thanks everyone for your interest in the webinar. Our next webinar will be on March the 15th of March, on cohesion policy in Croatia, presented by Dr. Jakša Pulic, from the head of the Department of European Integration in Zagreb, which I think will provide some interesting new insights into our newest member state. Okay, if you'd like to be kept in touch on that seminar or on others, please do contact us to be included on our mailing list, and we'll keep you up to date on future events. We hope to see you again, but thanks again, and have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.